All of our files are free and will remain free. If you like the show, you can show support by donating $1 to help with expenses. Just use the PayPal link on our website, YouTube channel, or Facebook page. Thanks.
And welcome back to part 2 with Mark Stavish. And let's just get right into this very engaging and very abstract, I grant you that, this discussion today on egregores. So if people, not everyone is following, you're forgiven because this is very abstract matters. But if you're going to free yourself from the influence of an egregore, do you have to be a magician? Do you have to understand the laws of manipulating energy and, how stuff works? Or is it possible? Because if you can create an egregore without being a magician, which you can, because most people contribute to it automatically, couldn't you also reverse it that way without having to, be a Mark Stavish? You see what I mean?
Well, that's the point, is that, the whole idea, what we see is people over-identifying with magician or this or that is in itself a problem. We have to understand what is the purpose of our path. Our path is awakening, and that awakening is the magical path is a path. It's a tool. It's not an identity.
Mm.
You mentioned earlier that it's not possible for like an entire culture to be involved in the path. And one of the few exceptions to that, both for good and not so good, was Tibet. Tibet was more or less established as a magical empire,
like Egypt,
right? And so we have a few examples of that, but here, Vajrayana on different levels was practiced or enforced, whatever you want to think of it as, across the culture. And you see a different aspect of that, a different expression in Egypt. So we see some examples of that, but they're rare, and they have both strengths and weaknesses. And so we have to look at everyone having their own path and their own mechanism. But how do we find that in a way that allows for what we might consider, I don't like to use this term, adaptation is the word, I don't like evolution, but greater harmony, if that's possible. We're at a time in the world where we have a tremendous amount of technology, tremendous amount of capacity, and these different egregores, seek to access that as well.
Mm.
So we have to constantly bring ourselves back as individuals to finding our purpose, our identity, and then finding that knowledge and conversation with your holy guardian angel, if you will, that state of inner awareness, even if it's not there all the time, at least to have it. And then how do we bring that forth into our life and then bring that forth into the world to some degree? I don't believe that we're going to have a great awakening.
You collectively.
Right. And even if we do, and I've written about the problems of that, even if we did have heaven on earth, it would only last for so long. Because the nature of cycles is such. And any utopian dream is going to be a nightmare.
Revolution eating its children.
So we have to find a way to recognize that there is a certain balance in creation, or duality, I should say, duality. And you're never going to have everyone being happy all the time, because you can't. There will always be suffering, because that is a perception and a perspective.
Are you now limited it to Earth, or are you saying in the entire universe?
I'm just focusing on our day-to-day human experience. I'm just focusing on that. Because that's where we're at, and where the people listening are mostly. We're focused on the human condition. Whether we want to admit to that or not.
The human earthly condition, because that's
right.
Because that's a karma in itself.
Right. So we look at this, and we have to recognize that we will do our best with the time we have and the energy and the resources we have to leave the world a little better, a little happier, a little more beautiful. But also recognize that this is cyclic.
Yeah.
And that we can't create heaven on earth without first creating it in ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And even that means it will only last on earth as long as we do.
Yeah. The Theosophists have a useful metaphor here. They say that, you know, the pupils move on in the system. So you begin as in the kinder school, and then you eventually get to the university level. So the pupils are moving on. That's the souls going through the bodies, but that the school is standing still. In other words, you'll never have a situation with the entire school, everybody's professors at the same time. That's akin to thinking that everybody on earth is enlightened at the same time, and now we have paradise. No, the earth is what it is. It gives us the lessons we have, but then we can, and I believe that's also the story of Enoch, who is related to Egregore.
Mm-hmm.
Enoch becoming Metatron, showing the way for the entire humanity that, look, you can raise yourself out of this hellhole. You can enter a higher level of existence when you have reached that level by embracing your development, but expecting that the physical world and its structures, all the new souls coming in all the time, all the new children coming in all the time,
Yes.
is going to keep us behind. It's going to drag us down collectively. It's going to hold us back anyway. So yeah, I tend to agree. If I'm going to make a judgment call, I tend to agree with what you say, precisely because of this simple rule.
Yeah. And again, the reason many people in Western esotericism don't understand that, in Western spirituality generally, is because they have naive notions about human beings as a whole.
Mm.
And they have also a certain sense of what we see as the strong influence of the notion of linear history.
Mm.
You know, that history's heading towards Omega.
Yeah.
We're heading towards heaven on earth. You know, we even see that transformed, you know, in the various apocalypticism of New Age groups and occult groups today. But again, those are all egregores just being transformed.
Yeah, but this poison comes from the Abrahamic traditions, because they believe in, simultaneously, they believe in heaven on earth or collapse, doomsday, not the cyclical thing.
Right.
And that spills over to other areas than just religion.
Right. And you see it, you know, and it exists in Indian and Tibetan philosophy as well. I mean, they have the Great War, you know, they do have an apocalyptic aspect as well, but it's cyclically
Exactly
worked in.
Yeah.
But that's still there. And that's why you see a lot of appeal to that. I mean, the Dalai Lama isn't out there giving, you know, Kala Chakra initiations, you know, just for the fun of it. You know, you're those are your recruitment papers into the great army of the Gelukka.
Right. Yeah, but nobody's saying bad stuff can't happen, even on a collective level. Just look at Atlantis or the antediluvian fall. But I'm just saying this notion, what's special with the Abrahamic is that it's now or never. This is it.
Right.
And it influences us. That's a powerful egregore. Look at the neocons. One of the reasons they are trying to maintain the suffering in Palestine, Israel, is that they want to bring about the second coming of Christ and this Jehovah's Witness kind of thing, that everybody's going to be, you know, what you call it in American fundamentalism, they have a term for it, where people elevate.
Yeah, the rapture.
Rapture, exactly.
But you see the same thing in the naive leftist politics too, that we're going to just create all these social service programs and people are just going to take advantage of them and they're going to stop being stupid and hurting themselves and they're going to grow up. I worked in social services. I worked in housing projects. I mean, I worked with all sorts of people from the bottom to the top, and it's not going to happen. So you can spend as much money as you want on these programs. It's not going to make it go away.
Good point.
You know, because it is a very good point, because it's an important point that is ignored by a majority of people in in social services, as well as in the why we see such a political bias towards leftist politics in contemporary esotericism.
I didn't know that.
Because they still suffer from the naive notion of human potential. And a lot of them never have any experience with it. That's the other thing. Again, I worked on the ground. You know, I was talking to someone that I told them where I once worked, and they looked at me because they know, well, you know, how many shootings have I witnessed? How many, you know, problems have I experienced or seen? So there's a level, and this goes to the aspect of what we were talking about earlier about angels and demons, you know, and people and the horror, the Lovecraftian horror. I'm tying this all in. Okay. That if you haven't seen the extreme horror of what people are capable of, and across the spectrum to all the wonderful goodness they're capable of too, you know, and beginning to put this in the framework of this is the nature of the experience of existence. If you have this all or nothing, then you're just going to think, you know, we got to bring about the rapture, or we just don't spend enough on this social service program, well, you know, or whatever. There's going to be the point is, if you have an all or nothing view, you're going to find a bias towards your preferred egregoric ideal of how to bring about heaven on earth, whether it's through warfare or through forcing people to be good for their own good, which is what we see with, again, this notion of how people are interacting with another through restraint and what you can and cannot talk about. Those are egregores as well.
Yeah, but you know what? I want to defend them because your former colleagues, they had to buy into that egregore to be able to, you know, function in this system. If they all became like, cynics, basically saying, I don't believe this is possible, they wouldn't be able to do their job. and their role is to alleviate suffering at that.
No, it's not about that. You're making a mistake here.
Okay, let's hear.
And the terrible mistake is they had to buy into it. No, you don't have to buy into it to alleviate suffering. What you have to buy into is that there's only so much suffering you can alleviate. And when I worked with drug addicts, I understood what the attrition rate would be, meaning that out of so many hundred people that I deal with, how many are going to die? Well, first of all, they're all going to die, but how many of them are going to die addicts? So you have to, and there is the trauma. There is the terror, the trauma that you recognize that you're really only able to help X percentage, and it's a low number. So this is where it goes into is, and again, unless you've done it and been there, it's a whole different world. So my point is the idealism is the self-destruction. The
wait a minute. Are you saying that if you have that realistic perspective, you can still do a good job?
Yes, because you know that you're working for, that's your success story. That's your success story. You're focusing on your successes. Look, if a general goes into battle and they focus on the death of every soldier, they'll never go into battle.
No. So it's the quality, it's not the quantity.
Right. But what happens is, you know, it all depends on then these other forces come into play, these other value structures, these other factors. And that becomes where the problems set in for the individual. At the end of the day, what we're looking at here is we have to recognize that we exist in a phenomenal environment in which suffering is we'll say that's kind of optional. It's a perspective, but there will be pain. There will be loss. How we address that and deal with it is important. The problem we see in occult circles is that many people are deceptive to themselves. I want to go study magic, and this is where we get into the publishing aspect. It's the spell of the week book. It's the book that's going to make my life better. You know, this is going to solve all my problems. My problems are going to go away. When you engage the paranormal, in fact, it's the opposite. In fact, when you engage in the psychic dimension, more of your problems come to the surface because they were right beneath it anyhow. Now you've just decided to find out what psychic forces, intrapsychic forces are making you tick. Now let's take that and put this on a larger level. And that is the level of the group, which is now the egregore. And the egregore as an organizing entity can either direct those intrapsychic forces to help you resolve them, or it can use them against you.
Right. But I want to point to another reason then, because we've been focusing now on the bad egregore of the Abrahamists and how that spilled over everywhere. And the fact that we live in a cyclical universe. But if you look at technology, I can see why people buy into the notion of that there is possibility to transform the entire collective world on a better level, because when you watch technology, that's what's going on there. I'm not saying modern technology is a blessing and good. I mean, look at 5G and a lot of negative aspects about it. So that's not the point if it's a good thing or not. The point is there is an actual evolution there that doesn't seem cyclical unless you go back to pre-Diluvian stuff where we may have had advanced technology, although it looks like it's an entirely different based technology than what we're having now. So because people watch that, look, wow, we can do the same in health. That's where you get notions like transhumanism and stuff like that. AI, we can make, and by the way, I speculated that AIs can be taken over by egregores. I want you to address.
Oh, I think so. Oh, no, yeah. I think technology is in it. I was talking to a friend about this regarding his classical Taoist instruction, which was magical Taoism, and the way they view any screen or surface is viewed as a psychic portal. And I think that because of its subtle nature, electronic technology is probably more vulnerable to some kind of psychic influence than others. Why? Because it's in motion, it's dynamic, and it's subtle. Okay, do you understand where the entryway is? Yeah. Okay, as opposed to, say, a hammer. You know, how much psychic input, you know, it takes. There's more energy needs to be used to affect a hammer than needs to be to affect a computer. And probably a very good example of that was with boy, his name escapes me at the moment, but he was involved. He was, I think, what do they call him? Psychic number 1 or 001 at the early psychic research that was taking place for the Army in Maryland. He blew out the computer systems in NATO, and on the other side of the in East Germany too. And that's how he got recruited.
Right.
So I do believe that what we think of as artificial intelligence, these different computer programs, I think that they can be hijacked. And I think the purpose, in many ways, they're being designed to be hijacked for the notion of transhumanism.
Yeah, but isn't it weird that the technology, and that spills over to health and many other things, that seems to be going in this direction? And there is this idea out there that when human beings, because of our karma, because of what we're supposed to experience at this level, when we reach a certain level, where we become like gods because of the technology, that's when it all collapses and resets.
Well, we see that notion too in some of the Indian philosophies, the Indian stories of the wars of the asuras between the demigods and the gods. They're very technologically oriented.
Yeah.
And we see that theme reoccurring often. I think technology is wonderful. It's what's allowing us to have this conversation. It's what's allowing us not to be struggling just to survive. So when we look at technology and we look at how it has come about, it's like anything. It becomes a philosophical view. That view becomes a limiting factor, and it seeks to self-propagate. So we want more of it.
Yeah.
And since the benefits are so easy to experience and often so desirable, it can be very difficult for us to look at the downside.
Yeah, we become dependent on it. So we are kind of trapped. We have to go along with that egregore because we're dependent.
Exactly. And it's like any egregore, it is difficult to see the downside because we're only focusing on that which we enjoy and benefit from.
Yeah. So
if you have an occult group or an esoteric group that's very small, they benefit from that size. This is very good. You know, we've got a good group here. Things are going well. We benefit well. And what they'll fail to do is see the downside of that, which is, well, how are we going to be around in 20 years? How do we find new members to keep this going? Same thing with something that's super big. This is great. We've got all these people. We've got all these resources. What's the downside? Oh man, you get personality issues, and sometimes you get people in there who really shouldn't be there. They become more of a problem than they're worth, or the watering down factor, whatever it happens to be.
Health.
So we have to just look at everything as, what is the strength and weakness we're dealing with, and just be honest about it. And technology, it's very difficult to get people to recognize the weaknesses, because you look at what can be done now on your phone, and that phone is more powerful than all of the computing systems that put the
man to the moon.
Man on the moon. Yeah. And it's not just more powerful, it's more powerful by a factor. I mean, I don't remember what it is, but it's a huge factor. So trying to get people to say, too much of the good thing is a vice, too much of a good thing is now a clipothic. Because how did the clipoth form? They didn't happen. The clipoth formed when there was too much energy in that point, and it broke. The shells broke. The container broke.
You're talking about the cliffforts in Kabbalah?
Yes.
Okay.
So we have to look at, too much of a virtue is a vice. Too much of, and again, I was talking about life on Earth, the life in the created realms. It's about that balance.
Yeah, but when technology starts ruining the world, nature and stuff, obviously, but it's so interesting, because we've been beating up on the Abrahamic influence in terms of the Abrahamic religions, in terms of political ideologies, like, this idea that, no, it's not cycle, it's we begin primitive and we end up advanced.
Right.
Nowhere is that stronger today than in scientism and transhumanism.
Right.
They really believe that human beings will evolve to a super advanced level because of technology.
Yes.
In health and everything. And in a way, that's probably the biggest war going on between egregores, is the traditional and ancient and cyclical view versus this, I don't know what to call it, but this redemption, linear evolutionary view. I don't know. Do you have a better word for it?
No, I don't. I mean, that's pretty much the terms I've used. It's trying to look at things in that linear onward and upward approach versus cyclic, and trying to get people to reconcile these, that things yes, we are moving forward in that upward adaptive view technologically and intellectually and in many wonderful ways. At the same time, we have to recognize the cyclic nature of things, and that these two views need to, at least with us as individuals, need to be harmonized, because if we stay too cyclical, then nothing changes. There's really
you know what, that's a spiral,
right?
Then it's a spiral.
That's right. Then we have the spiral. The spiral means we recognize that things are continually repeating themselves on different levels. Not repeating, but you know what I'm saying. We're coming back, just like the seasons, but we have more experience each time. We have more intellectual, more spiritual, more emotional experiences to integrate into that framework once again. So we're able to expand. Whereas if it's simply cyclical, there's no real growth. It's very slow and problematic. And if it's simply linear, then it's gonna hit a cliff.
Yeah.
I mean, there's gonna be a point where it can't go anymore.
No, it has to be 2 steps ahead and 1 back.
Yes. Yeah.
Brilliant.
But those are intellectual egregores, and I'm sure if we were to follow it out, we could find some kind of entity of some kind that in some mythology or hierarchy somewhere. I'm serious. Is behind it. Yeah. I've often used the term Ahriman from Steiner, because I think that fits in well. His view of
from Zoroaster, actually.
From Zoroaster, but Steiner made it popular with his notions of that in his view. Yeah. So I use that at times to describe the kind of existence that we have with technology at the moment.
People shouldn't underestimate egregores. I experienced firsthand, let's go back to our time in AMORC. I remember when there was a huge power battle there.
Oh, I remember it well.
Yeah. I went out of AMORC around, it was sometimes in the 90s. I forget when, actually. But I didn't last long after Christian took over. I lasted
about the same time I probably left.
Yeah, probably. And I saw in my local lodge, one of the reasons I left the organization was that I saw how people could, because, this shit obviously was descending into even local branches, right? It starts on the top and it goes like shockwaves down in the system. And most people there were good guys. They wanted the best, good high ethics, but because of the egregore and the cult thing, I'm not saying AMORC was a cult, but it had sectarian aspects. So they could see an injustice happened and they would try to rationalize it with their cognitive dissonance because they identified so much with the egregore. So they would let people suffer and be victimized and not apply their personal ethics. And I think Freemasons, at least the Freemasonic rituals and traditions in Norway, have built into the rituals something very interesting, because there they say, and that didn't happen in AMORC at least, there they say in the initiation, they say that a Mason should always let their personal conscience and ethics and understanding come before the organization and the powers and the authorities.
Okay, good.
That's a very interesting, and I'm not saying just because they have it, it works, but that's a minimum of what you should expect in order to battle this sheep herding that the egregore will do with you if not. You understand what I mean?
Yes, Al. But I think the interesting part is to look at Freemasonry and AMORC, first of all, as two different entities. And Freemasonry is a fraternal organization, not an esoteric one, although it has esoteric qualities and aspects to it. It isn't inherently what we think of as a spiritual practice organization, meaning methods and teachings are given. It has qualities to it, but it is not the same. Within AMORC, I know that there were some statements about the freedom of conscience in there. I don't remember where and when. I know they did exist. And of course, the period you were referring to took place at the end of the 80s into the early 90s. And listeners can easily look this up. In Wikipedia, there's some aspects of it, of the Stuart affair, in which Gary Stuart was deposed as imperator under various financial scandals. It has been a point that is interesting to note that for several years prior to that, there were problems in that Grand Lodge, and you can find what was known as the Rosicrucian Chronicles, which was a physical paper or a newsletter of some type that was sent out from officers, disgruntled officers in the Grand Lodge, about what was happening in AMORC at that time. I saw them, I read them, I had copies of them, I have PDFs now. You can find them. But what's critical is, how do those problems come about? And it had to do with various aspects of people wanting to be in control. And I'm not necessarily going to say who was right and wrong there, because it's still a hot button issue for several people. But one of my initial concerns was how, when Christian Bernard, the son of Raymond Bernard, became imperator, how Gary Stuart's picture was removed from lodges. That is, he was erased from history. Exactly. And that I had a problem with. If he was human and made mistakes or errors or something, that's one thing. But to erase him from history is to deny the fact that he even existed or was there.
Very Stalinist.
And I had a problem. Right. He was Stalinist, and I had a problem with that. What I also had a problem with was something that had never existed before. And those were loyalty oaths. That was very strange. And I've seen variations of that even recently that were sent to me. Those types of things I felt were not needed. I mean, either you were loyal, whatever that meant, or you weren't, whatever that meant, and you left or just went your own way, or you stayed. but that certain things are being requested or required that increasingly created a kind of cultish atmosphere. Now, I have to tell you this, and this is very important to understand. Prior to this, the organization, of course, was very big. There were about 45,000 members in the English-speaking Grand Lodge, most of those in the US and Canada, if I remember correctly.
I heard they had 6 million all over the world at the maximum. I don't know if that's true.
Yes, at the maximum peak, yes. And that probably would have been a few years earlier or at about the same time.
Mm.
Now, that Grand Lodge after this affair collapsed down to a point of about 5,000 members.
Yeah, of course.
It is since rebuilt, but it's not the same in many ways. Now, the point here is that, yes, we joked about it. I was very involved, and I had relationships, good friendships, and still do with former Grand Lodge officers. I was technically a Grand Lodge officer myself. And we joked about what we called AMORCians. These are kind of true believer types. Yeah. But these were often very nice people, and I enjoyed them, and I liked their company, even if they were a bit fluffy. I don't know how to put it, just enthusiastic. They're very, a little dogmatic at times, but at least you could count on them for things. You could trust them with your house plans. Yeah. Now, that being said, this is different than the kind of dogmatic self-importance that I see in a lot of what's left of AMORC today. A lot of really good sense that we have the truth. Now, I don't think that's coming out of Grand Lodge as much but it's not necessarily being discouraged. It's very good to have pride in your organization. It's very good to have that. You need to have that, otherwise why belong to it? But we have to be careful that pride does not get in the way of practice, or that practice makes you think you actually know what other practices are too, when you don't. And I've seen that kind of statement where there's a statement of superiority when they don't even understand their own history. Again, they don't understand their own history. Now, it's easy to pick on them because, again, we were members and we've pointed this out. But what that was happening is that very thing you were talking about, that battle of the Egregores. And I saw people who were good friends for decades become very split over this issue and see friendships pulled apart, lodges pulled apart. Man, my robes were stolen at that time from my Martinist robes.
Jeez.
And they were
that's exactly where I was going, because I think there was a war against egregores taking place within AMORC, because Bernard represented, because in Europe, in France, they had developed more independently without control and insight of the Americans who doesn't even understand French. And this had been going on long before Christian Bernard and Gary Stewart. So I think it kind of peaked. It kind of got their release when those two guys took over. Because with the former boss, Ralph Lewis, he was like, I call him a museum curator. He had like the whole structure where under his... You see, that's a benefit, actually, of autocracy. It couldn't erupt under his regime, but it could when he left. So I'm totally with you. I think it was a clash of egregores taking place.
Well, and I think there's more to it than that.
Let's hear.
I think that you see the problem being is that there was the notion of the French felt that Rosicrucianism had to be French.
Right.
There was that aspect. Mm-hmm. There was a very strong cultural egregore at work. And this, my own experiences, well, first of all, Jean Dubuis and Raymond Bernard did not get along very well. Mm. And there's often the question of what would have happened if Dubuis had been the Grand Master. What direction?
Let me just fill in, people.
Go ahead.
Yeah. So Dubuis is a guy who founded something called Philosophers of Nature, neo-alchemical organization, but he came out, as so many modern esotericists have done, out of AMORC.
That is correct, and he had his own contacts there, but the organization grew because of those contacts within it. That his experience, he was quite well respected within the Martinist circles as well. Now, so we have that framework taking place, and I believe from my own encounters with both of them at that time, both Gary Stewart and Christian Bernard, I believe that Gary Stewart was not up to the task.
Mm.
I think there was probably some kind of crisis that took place. Many of us believe, because there was a period there where he was kind of wild-eyed. We call it the wild-eyed look days.
Right.
And you may remember the photographs. They weren't encouraging.
Right.
But it could have been a part, and this is the way I describe it. And I don't know if this is true. I describe it, you're told about these invisible masters and this great hierarchy and all this stuff. And now suddenly you're in charge, and you sit down at the desk and you're waiting for them to come through the room, and they're not, and now it all rests on you.
I interpreted it as he was paranoid because of all the backstabbing and scandals.
Yes.
Yeah. Mm.
Right. And that's very discouraging. And you don't want that to get out to the membership, because it's, again, ideals. The idealism was the basis of the membership in the egregore.
Mm.
Okay. And then we have Christian there, who he was just felt this was his birthright.
He was a crusader.
Yeah, this was his birthright. And I'll leave it at that. I have more to say, but I'll leave it at that. So I think that you between these two, this is my birthright, and this is, again, wow, this is huge. There's all this stuff going on. How do I manage all these affairs? The situation was ripe for some kind of collapse, and when that collapse took place, it significantly and seriously devastated the organization. But that had to take place on a psychic level first, by the way. Now, it is my theory. I'm just throwing it out there for discussion for you guys to banter about on the off time. Two things are essential in the time we live in for the so-called more negative forces to prevail. One was, you needed the destruction of AMORC, because it was one of the few widespread accessible organizations that had decent teachings on esotericism available.
True.
You needed that. So you got to destroy that. Because these smaller groups just aren't capable of it.
No.
They just don't have it. Now, they may be able to hold the battle on their own front, but, they're fighting a partisan war. That's what they're doing. So
they're not going to influence culture in a collective level.
That's right. They're not going to influence culture. No. So let's be honest there. The other is, you need to destroy the Catholic Church. And the reason being is, for all its problems, it is one of the last vestiges of that tradition that still has an operative armory known as the Roman ritual of exorcism.
That's a new one.
Yeah. So you look at and there's other factors I can bring up too, but I'm just putting those two out there. Those are just two for consideration. There's a few others, but just, I want you to think about this, because if you're talking about, as was it, René Guillon talked about, the crack in the wall, particularly with psychic phenomena and that type of thing, UFOs, you need to destroy those organizations which have the capacity to at least make people awake and to some degree defend themselves against it. And of course, there are others out there as well. But when going back to AMORC, what we saw was this battle between people, and it was over something that was so emotional, because it was ideological, really. It was about their beliefs.
And abstract.
It was abstract. It was their belief. And their faith in the whole cosmic hierarchy, quite literally, was undermined. Because how could the cosmic masters let this happen?
Yeah, but that's theosophy. Go back 100 years to theosophy. Same thing.
Right. How could the unknown superiors, how could the invisible masters who guide and influence our imperator and grand masters, how could they let this happen? And that was the question. And it's kind of ignored today, but that was the big question. And that was a crisis of faith. And not just on the level, and I'll tell you right, it wasn't just on the level of the membership. It was on the level of Grand Lodge officers. Yeah.
It split into, Gary continued with his own Rosicrucian. He stick to the old, he actually went even further back to Harvey Lewis, like 100 years ago. So he had that kind of perspective. And Christian, I think he introduced a lot of new stuff too.
Yes.
From already under his reign, when he was Grand Master in France, before Gary Stewart became the international head, they already, I think even under Raymond Bernard, his father, they had already started to do their own thing. And like you say, they think the whole notion belongs to them because they're French. So, yeah, I think it's for some reason, AMORC managed to have within itself a battle of egregores that then eventually manifested at the level of human interaction. But the big question is this, let's say, destructive forces, demonic forces, poisonous forces, whatever you want to call it, forces, did they enter this directly, or was it through earthly vehicles like, let's say, CIA or something, where there are many human organizations that are basically drones for these cliphotic forces or whatever you want to call them. I don't like the word demon because I'm in a I'm in a Greek-Egyptian tradition, and daimon is actually a very good thing.
I know it's the difficulty of language, where we're very careful here.
Yeah.
While we're having a slow conversation, because we have to define so many things to make sure we're clear. Yeah. I don't think it matters too much. I think that when we make too much of a distinction between inner and outer, we're again falling into the trap of dualism.
Right.
And
materialism.
It is. Yeah, it's materialism. It's not a chicken or the egg thing. That the capacity to enter had to be there. The immune system, so to speak, had to be weakened sufficiently for the infection to take place. Otherwise, if it wasn't, it wouldn't have mattered. And, things go through cyclic histories. Some people believe that all this was necessary to fulfill the AMORC's expiration date. It has an expiration date on it, at least on the English Grand Lodge. And then there's discussion does that mean...
108 years, right?
Right, the 108 years. Does that mean it would cease to exist or simply go quiet? That going quiet might fulfill that prophecy. What matters, I think, most is that when we look at for me, my great uncle was involved in 27. So I have letters sitting behind me from Harvey Lewis. Okay. When we look at the degrading of the teachings, of the quality of the teachings since then, that from the 20s to the 80s, they were really very much the same, and they were very good. There wasn't as much change as many people like to think there was.
But they purged a lot of the occultism was purged.
That they say that, but I've not seen it. I've looked at.
No, I mean now, not at the beginning, but if you compare.
The stuff from the stuff that I've seen now. I'm sorry if this offends current members listening, but the lessons that they're sending out on PDF, which I have up into through the 10th degree, are very poor quality, and they're very poor quality compared to what was once sent out. And I even recognized from my own writings some of the things that were in the newer lessons that weren't in the old ones, but I published it.
Right.
Now, that's fine. I don't care about that. But what I did notice is, and this got me in trouble, was an emphasis on the egregore, which was never there. AMORC always acknowledged the existence of such a thing, but the emphasis wasn't as strong. And I talked about that in the book, Egregores. And you saw that strongly in this one. And I was actually uninvited from a conference, the 100th anniversary of Johannes Kelpius Lodge. Up in Boston, I was invited to present there, and then I was told that I was directly uninvited by the Grand Master.
I mean, this was after you quit, right?
Yeah, and I let them know. I said, well, I haven't been a member in 20 years. And they said, fine, but I knew all these people. They wanted me back. And I said, sure, I'll go back. Oh, well, then can you, it's for members only. Well, you didn't tell me that, but okay. So I joined up again.
Oh, okay.
Said, pay the dues for 3 months.
Right.
Just to attend. Okay, fine. I'll do that. It's like $8 or $10 a month by email, electronically. That's fine.
And they still uninvited you?
And then I was uninvited.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. But, and I think that was very telling. And the point is, I think it had to do with my essay that I had published, which is still available on Vox Hermes, about the notion of egregores. And that they weren't mentioned by it in name, but they'd get, I think they could put two and two together. You know, that emphasis on the egregore is now so strong within the organization that what I see, and again, this is what I see, and it is clouded by social media encounters that needs to be clearly stated, is that there is a lot of vocal self-congratulatory activity among membership that focuses more on their membership as a statement or badge of honor and advancement rather than on practice. And that's because so much emphasis is on the egregore. And that wasn't there when I was in. That didn't exist.
That's interesting. I remember, I think AMORC was the first place where I encountered the concept. And I think it was a pretty decent, but you're right, it was never a big deal. It was just there as one of many things you had to know about.
Yes, it was there, and you were to try and attune to it in different ways, but it wasn't ham-fisted, as we say. It wasn't pounded. You didn't hear the word repeated over and over and over and over again.
But you know, the primary tool to connect with it was what they call the heavenly sanctum.
Yeah, the celestial sanctum, right?
Down to the technique of how you do it, and all the people who went that way. And I had experiences I'm rarely personal in the podcast, but we've opened personal doors now. I'll just come clean.
Sure.
I had experiences at that level where I think I interacted with egregores. I saw living members, I saw dead members, and of course unknown people too. But it was I would say, I felt it like a pretty comfortable, pleasant place to be, you know?
Yes, yeah. And that needs to be made clear too, that it was different. The emphasis was different. The experiences were different. It wasn't a big deal. It wasn't like what we see, or at least here, what I'm getting sent to me even 20 years later. And I haven't been in well over 25 years. Okay. But it was just a different experience. And I think that shapes and shifts the members' perspective. So we can apply that now to any organization or group, by the way. That's why we're maybe going through these details with you. What we've just said is now applicable. You can take what we've just described and now look at your experiences in other groups, whether it's the PTA or the bowling league. I mean, how people can become really emotionally attached and identified with roles and perceptions or ideologies and beliefs that now cloud their very reason for beginning to join to begin with.
Yeah, I would say the AMORC story could also be the story of humanity itself, our culture.
Yes.
But interesting thing here. If you look at occult groups, esoteric groups, orders, societies, whatever you want to call it, initiatory traditions, nowhere else is this so ingrained. I mean, I mentioned Theosophy, you can mention O2O, you can mention Golden Dawn, Freemasons. Take any group and they have all experienced a similar power battle like this, this AMORC thing. And I think the reason, and this is just an idea I got from our conversation today, is that it is precisely in such groups people are being empowered and getting the tools to interact with egregores, to create them, to destroy, well, not destroy, but you know what I mean, dismantle. I think that's the reason, maybe more than anywhere else than there. At least a part of the reason that we see that happen there.
I think that's correct because, and I don't want to get too technical here, but I will for the sake of those who have some interest in this. We talk about ego inflation. First of all, ego is not a bad thing. That's the first problem. It's what we identify with. It means I am that. I am this thing. It's identifier. And the force of ego, of identification, is the same as the force of liberation. You know, in yoga, it's the different yogas, it's the energy of the descent, as we would call it, forms the identifying force we call ego. We'll call it the ascent or initiation. That's
the soul.
What we call kundalini. It's the same energy. It's just a different identifying force or different degrees of identification. In descent, the identification is more narrow and limited. In the ascent, it's more open and expansive. But it's
let me throw in some associations so people follow. Descent is the masculine centrifugal. Ascent is the feminine centripetal. Ascent brings you back in fusing with the one. Descent is the creational part of the process. It's the expansion of the cosmos. Is God breathing out, Brahman breathing out, as the Indians would say.
Yes, they do.
Or as the Kabbalists say, if you have Aya, Asher, Aya, then Aya, Asher is descent. Asher, Aya is ascent. Anyway, go on.
Yes, and that's important to understand. So when you enter into this path, there is going to be literally an inflation. That is, the energies, the airs, what you call the prana, the air, the energy is expansive. And people will identify with that expansion. And that's part of the process of being able to identify with it and disidentify with it and see it more precisely and accurately. So as people become more capable, they develop more abilities, more skills, more accomplishments, or siddhas, as you want to call them. Or that it's natural that there will be this sense of empowerment, expansion, inflation. The question is, how do we deal with it constructively? How do we handle it? And because of that, I agree with you that these problems are more apparent because people are expanding. Well, the problem is they're not necessarily integrating well, because that's a difficult process. Yeah. The integration is a difficult process. That's all there is to it. So, right, whereas you're not going to see that as much in other areas because the degree of expansion or enhancement isn't going to be as dramatic or with as many people.
It's more, and it's more automatic there. I mean, a supporter club, for example, that egregore is like we established earlier, the supporters have no clue about it. So it's not that dangerous even for if someone want to use an egregore. The most dangerous manifestations on Earth would be those groups of people who have a conscious, aware relation to it. It just makes total sense. More so, I would say, than the Catholic Church, because although the Catholic Church does have, like you rightly point out, tools to battle certain creatures, it's been in a perpetual decay for hundreds of, if not thousands of years. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, well, that's the example. I mean, the size of it.
And the size, yes.
I mean, prior to about the 10th or 12th century, you could do almost anything in Catholicism and get away with it as long as you appended in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit on it.
Yeah.
And that's particularly true in Northern European countries. You can get away with a tremendous amount. But and that's in part because there was no Skype, there was no memo, there was no email, there was no way to keep everything as homogenized as people might like. And of course, this changes over time. And really, the high point of the church, the Roman Church, might have been the Renaissance, I think, in terms of esotericism and all of that. But it's also when we see the split with the Protestant Reformation. So, the size of it meant that inherently there were going to be many egregores or battles. Yeah. And not to go too far off topic, but probably one of the more interesting ones to study is the Jesuits. They come closest in many ways to having a real solid, what we would call a cult system within the Catholic Church. And of course, they were suppressed at different times and have done different things. But so when you get into the large groups, that you grow to a certain size where you have these fractions that develop, they have their own egregores, they fight for control. But what we're looking at in terms of our cult groups is we want to make sure that our esoteric groups are functional, that they're healthy, that they're productive, that they can exist.
And that they liberate people.
They can help people get the tools for liberation.
Yeah, instead of enslaving them.
Right, and that they're going to be around for another generation or two or three. That it's sustainable. That's the point that we were talking about earlier, and that I did on the interview, is that current esotericism is not sustainable for a variety of reasons, and that's another talk. But so we need to think about these things so that we have to create healthy egregores. and be on the lookout, just as we are look on our own physical and mental health for illness and prevention and cure. We have to do the same with our esoteric egregores.
We have to add that what really matters in esoterica is the perpetuation of the liberation tradition.
Yes.
More than groups. Groups are like bodies. I'm born and eventually I decay and die. Same with groups. But if the tradition can find new vehicles, new outlets for the light.
Correct.
But, I'm buying more and more into this quote unquote conspiracy theory you launched, because take a look at the Muslim world. It's the exact same problem there. You have the Sunni Islam, which is the biggest one and most exploited by petty powers. And then you have Shia Islam that is more close connected to esotericism. There are Sufi groups within Sunni, but there are many, many more within Shia and, Alevi and Bektashi. And if within Shia, you have different traditions there too, but you have even in the main Shia itself can be said to have a certain aspect of occultism, whereas Sunni is much more dogmatic, much more a tool for the powers that be, like Catholicism, if you like. So, and why is Shia being crushed contemporary from all directions? I think it could be an aspect of it could have to do with this too. Very interesting.
Well, I think that, we have to look at what is the function, and that the things that function currently to help at least keep people in a general wellness direction, or which eventually can lead to enlightenment or liberation or something. Remember, step by step, you have to, in this battle of ideas, which is what we're engaged with on a very large scale. It always has been that way, but now it's just larger and more apparent because of technology, is where do we stand in this? How do we find our way, and how do we help others? And the easiest way is to simply free yourself from the notion that you know for certain what is going on, because you don't. Just recognize that there are things that are happening that you may or may not agree with, but that's irrelevant. You shouldn't even be concerned with what you agree with. It's what do you know? What do you understand?
Yeah.
And then from that is this helping me to liberate myself, to be more awake, more alert, more enlightened? Or is it not? And we have to get very, very selfish in that regard, in a positive way, a positive selfishness, because you can only help others to the degree that you can help yourself.
True. And another truism is, the humbleness you point to, which should be our starting ground, is just the more I know, the less I know, right?
Yeah, in fact, as an example, there's a fellow out there who several years ago wanted to purchase the Institute from me. And I asked him, I said, well, what do you mean? And I thought it was very fascinating, because he makes a big claim to all of his traditional connections. So why are you bothered with me?
Well, I can tell you, do you know whatever he's called? A con man?
He interviewed me several years ago. And it was very funny, because he sent me a list of questions, and they were quite innocent. And I answered them honestly. And he published them in his book very quickly. He didn't change anything. So I don't have anything against him in that regards. He did not misrepresent me in any way.
You were lucky.
However, it was very odd. I didn't quite see what the reason was. And he was trying to connect it in with, well, come on, who's that fellow? The Griffin with the Golden Dawn, the Griffin's Golden Dawn somehow. Yeah. Well, anyhow, there was no misrepresentation of me in the book. The book was quickly withdrawn because the OTO sued him.
Right. That's they have like a gossip perspective on the history of esotericism. Well, it's very sad.
It's even worse, because the usual extreme self-righteous arrogance of all things. Who was it? Basically a online gossip rag about all that was wrong with every personality either spirituality or religion or esotericism. And their perspective,
Right.
It was just terrible. But a lot of these folks, they do but you have to question their research.
Yeah, and these people can't be trusted because, like you said, you experience yourself. They write to you, and then bam, it's going to be published or it's going to be abused.
Mhm.
Like this crazy guy, he basically takes work from other people and translates it. But I'll say this: yes, he is lifting a lot of good information because he knows how to sniff down the source, like Gerard Galtier's book on Le Fils de Cagliostro.
Oh, yes.
Very good book. Right. So he uses stuff like that. I give him that. But the way he presents it's chaotic. It's a very childish perspective. It's like I said, it's like a gossip column on. And he reveals very superficial understanding. Granted, he's dealing with history here, who did what when, etc., or joined what when. But he still manages to have a very, I mean, give me Gerald Galtier or Serge Caillet anytime. Those guys know how to write, and he doesn't. So
and they were directly involved on it. They even if they weren't practitioners, there's a strong sympathy.
Yeah,
it's
respect.
Like,
I would say respect
yes.
is a better word. Yeah.
Yes.
But they are practitioners, They're Memphis Misraim, they're Martinists, Masons.
Well, even Antoine Favre was a Martinist in his early days.
Right.
It's not well known, but he was.
Yeah, I know. But yeah, in the esoteric groups in Europe who works traditional, there is like a knowledge about these crooks. They're all lepers in their eyes, a collection of crooks. And that's what happened to the alchemist Arthur. I don't think he lives anymore. Arthur, what's his name again? Old-timer in alchemy, guaranteed you know him, probably a friend of yours. And this crazy guy...
I know the name. Art Kunken.
Kunken. Yeah, and this crazy guy managed to get under, he took him in, and he thought he was a genuine representative of some traditions in Europe. And he didn't know it, but he was recorded and everything went on. And he used it and pretended he was the leader of the Illuminati. First off, like just believing that exists, with membership and everything. And then he was the leader. And so he abused art, unfortunately, because I like art. Or liked. I don't know, does he live anymore? Or?
I believe that he passed away between 1 and 2 years ago.
Yeah, that may be true. And he had an excellent library. So, but he was abused. He was taken advantage of by cretins like this.
I know.
Okay. And by the way, when I observe how many so-called orders operate, I have much more respect for creation like what you did. Instead of having this, ego inflated, they're so focused on lineages, on history, because they don't have any, or are top secrets because they don't have any. And they almost operate like cults, some of them.
Yes.
And all sorts of weird figures there, name it. Then it's much better to just cut the crap, create a semi-exoteric organization about the mysteries like you've done, and just keep like an academic schooling system like you've done. Much better than these theater orders, as I call them.
Yeah, and we're focused on practice. I mean, almost everything we do is practice oriented.
Right.
And the reason being is at the end of the day, we're asking the hard questions, and we ask people to ask that themselves. I mean, your lineage is a beginning. Your true growth comes from your personal practice. So what are you doing? Why are you doing it? And what can you expect to get from it? These are difficult questions that need to be asked and answered, because that's the only way you're going to grow.
Yeah, I agree. It's what it's all about, isn't it?
Sure.
So there's a lot of dubious figures out there, and they just more and more and more. I mean, back in the day, you only had Crowley. Maybe Gurdjieff too. But now it's like an army of those guys. And that's what people think esotericism is when they encounter it online, which is a tragedy. So anyway, hopefully we can give them a better perspective today.
Yeah, that would be really wonderful. And the young, I had to give an education to, and an education about the sins of political correctness too. This idea of the internet doesn't tell me anything. The internet doesn't say they exist or something like this. And I say, and if there's a God in heaven, it never will.
Yeah.
But just because you don't know about it doesn't mean it's not there. The internet is not the end all be all of esotericism or information.
But this is a disease you see on many levels, that if people are not aware of something, they think it doesn't exist. And if you tell them anything, science, whatever, and if you try to tell them, they're skeptical because they didn't hear about it. That's a solecism, a philosophical solecism, like a disease. I mean, our starting point should be humility and I know nothing.
And that's all right.
Yeah. Yeah, that should be our starting point, but it's not anymore, it seems. And I blame the internet for that.
Well, I just find that a little amusing. Because it's so true.
Yeah.
So
now the last thing I want to take up with you before we go to your books and your practical stuff, because I kind of hinted to it in the beginning, and it may not be that related to egregores, but it's a super interesting point. And while I have you here, you especially, I need to take it up with you, and that's the body of light. This idea that when we die, because look at this, if there is a counter tradition, as some say, that is these forces that try to keep us down, that try to keep us in ignorance, that want to harvest our energy instead of us being liberated, and they attack stuff like occult groups that could be tools for liberation, gnosis. I mean, look at what happened to the Gnostics. Now, if this is true, then they should be very interested in stopping us from having control of our own transition, our own death process. Because if more and more people are able to steer and maneuver in between worlds in the reincarnation process, then more enlightened people will come back. We will retain more memory of our former lives. It is a threat. So I'm thinking, if the notion of a diamond body, the Pythagoreans call it the Egregores, the body of light, whatever, if that is a real thing, then I think it's connected here. What is your thoughts?
Oh, it is. It's definitely, and let me point out, the only thing you need to ask about a spiritual teaching, and you should get a clear answer to this, is what will this do for me while I'm alive? And what will this do for me when I'm dead? And you need to have a clear answer to that. And the purpose of meditation is to develop a focal point of stability of consciousness free from external stimulation. We retain consciousness because of the amount of sensory input affecting our brains every second. When we enter into meditation, in theory, that decreases, or at least our awareness of it decreases. And we have to be able to maintain awareness, stability of awareness, free from sensory input. Most people don't reincarnate because of an idea. They reincarnate because of a habit, habituation.
Right.
Just as you wake up from a nightmare because you want to wake up from a nightmare, well, where do? You go into your body, so to speak, and wake up. Now, this is important because you need to develop that stability of awareness so that when you are no longer have a physical form to provide that platform, which it is a platform for you, you can self-create it as a self-creating being in the astral without it disintegrating. Because most astral forms are like soap bubbles. They disintegrate. It's like asking a 12-year-old, what do you want to do when you grow up? Well, I want to be a fireman. I want to be a zoologist. I want to be an astronaut. Just changes. So we have to be able to develop that mental process of concentration to be able to create the proper psychic vehicle, which is an energetic and mental vehicle to sustain consciousness with. And that continuity of consciousness is what provides us a vehicle so that memory is retained. And with that memory, which is what we go over so in detail in the book, Between the Gates, Lucid Dreaming, Astral Projection, the Body of Light, in Western esotericism, which is a whole story. That was a disaster getting that published. There's a whole story behind that. Talk about the demiurge not being pleased, right? So you have to have that. The single most important practice you can have is the development of the body of light. The single most important one.
Right.
Because with it, all of your other psychic faculties will come online, to use that idea, that phrase. And that's why it's very critical. And for all the reasons you've said. And that's why organizations that don't focus on it or something like it will focus instead on, well, you're probably not going to be able to develop that. So what we're going to do is focus on the egregore.
Right.
Okay, well, that's a good mechanism. That's a good intermediary, but it's not the same as your own individual status.
And it's much easier to be taken advantage of.
Correct.
Right. You know what? I think we are peeking into an abyss here that would take another entire show. And I think maybe it's better you come back in the future and we discuss another book, the one you mentioned, where we discuss stuff like lucid dreaming, etc. We could probably continue some of these points there, especially the last one here.
That would be wonderful.
So,
well,
yeah,
that would be wonderful. Just anytime you like, just let me know and we can discuss that, because that's critical for the path. It's critical for the individual.
Exactly.
And of course, for the individual in whatever group or people they may be working with as well, so that they can know what is important to focus on and what some of the signals are for their work being productive and useful. But this notion of the body of light part is the key. A lot of these groups just don't have that information.
No, they don't. And basically, everything we do has to do with preparing for death. And the most powerful ritual I've ever experienced in my life, and I've been in a lot of ritual, I visited other groups, Tibetans, you name it. And I was present I've been so lucky as to be present at the death ritual where when we initiate who had died. This death ritual is kind of connect with the Egregore and help the dying. It is creating I'm not giving details, so I can talk about this in general. Sure. Creating I think a portal, like a kind of creating some kind of energy without going into details, and then invoke the brother or sister who's recently departed and bind them into the center of the place where this is taking place, and then what you call it, when you get some extra thrust, kind of throw them into the path further. So create this energy ritually, invoke the person, and then guide that person further into the other world. And it's all done with lots of tools, like sound is being made, chanting, recitations, actions. It's the most powerful. I was there with another from Norway, and he was in tears. It was annoying actually, because snot and I had to hold his hand, right, and he got snot on it and everything. So, but okay, but that's how powerful. I was just blown out of my socks, and I realized, oh my God, man, it's all about the death process.
And it's wonderful.
Nothing like that in AMORC. And I hardly actually encountered that perspective in AMORC.
Okay.
So yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. And I didn't know you had even written about it until now. So I saw it now that you mentioned the book. So I'm going to get that book too.
There's a whole story. The book was a disaster getting out. It was just such...
Yeah, what was that?
Well, it's a long story, but at least it's done. When we have time, I'll tell you the backstory of the book too.
Yeah, okay.
But the saving grace, and we'll talk about this in the future, of AMORC is, in my mind, the 9th degree.
Cloud of obscurity?
The cloud and assumption.
Right.
Those two practices are fundamental to everything.
Did you see, there was a book in the 70s, very good book. I don't know who the author is. I tried to find out. It's a normal name, but he issued several books. One of them was on the cloud. I think that book was called Invisibility.
Yes.
Steve Richards.
Steve Richards.
So is that a real name or is it a pseudonym? Do you know?
Don't know. I couldn't tell you, but...
Did you get his other books?
I read them.
Yeah.
I read several of them.
I like all of them.
Yeah.
I mean, they are at a simple level, but he's really addressing the mysteries there. Levitation,
Yes.
chance or something.
Well, I have people who are working just on the teachings of the old lessons, 7th, 8th, and 9th degree.
Right.
Okay, that's all.
I think the method AMORC uses for the cloud is far superior to the method they use in Servants of the Lights or in O2O. They're using ritual magic. I don't think that's as effective as this.
No, it's not. It's not. And we can go into it at length because I got to get my dog out there. But in the future, I'll have, hopefully I'll be able to have some a paper to publish on it within the Institute. But we'll talk about that in the future.
Yeah, we will. So we have that then and talk more about your work. But is there something we haven't covered you think that we should cover?
I think we should at all. I think the AMORC one might be one of worthy discussion because it has been 30 years.
Yeah.
And it's almost like it's been forgotten.
Yep. Okay. And now, finally, your million books. Let's start with that. Okay. Jesus, man, you've been prolific the last years. How many books? Oh, look at this. You got a book called The Liturgy of Hermes.
Yes.
I have to buy this book. How interesting. Yeah, see, this is from your ritual series. I see how you're doing it. Okay.
That's a very nice practice, by the way.
Oh, yeah. How many books have you written?
That depends on how you count.
Right. For English.
Oh, there's some in the pipeline. So it's just safe to say around 30.
30. See, back when we used to communicate in the where was it? Was it in the Alchemy Forum?
I believe so.
It may have been what's his name, Adam McLean's forum, or it may have been in Alt AMORC. Were you ever in Alt AMORC?
Boy, that sounds familiar, but I can't place it. I don't think so.
Long ago. It's like the early internet. Anyway, back then you hadn't written one book, so that means that you have written probably more than one book per year.
Well, it's this way. I wrote my first book, the way I explain it, after I probably wrote my first article with about, I was probably doing this for 15 years before I wrote my first article on esotericism.
Right.
I want to put that in perspective compared to what we see going on today.
Yeah.
And then I wrote my first book. I think I've been 20 years, or maybe more, maybe 25. I'd have to check let's do this. I can do the dates backwards for you. I think it was 2005 Alchemy came out. So if we go backwards, 95, 85. Yeah, it's about 25 years in before I wrote my first book.
Yeah.
So that's the framework. And that's kind of something I've been talking about quite a bit lately is, this framework for esotericism is fundamentally not functional, not sustainable, and the reasons why. And one of it has to do with is how we approach it and how we approach authors and teachers within it.
Yeah.
And that falls into the Egregore concept as well.
Yeah, it does.
So when I started writing, I actually wrote 2 books for Llewellyn back to back. The Kabbalah was next, which is ironic because it went out of print in English, but was continued to be in print in other languages, and I put it back in print in English. Then, of course, my book in Freemasonry with them went out of print in English, although it's doing very well in other languages, but we've just gotten it back in English with a new edition with Inner Traditions for this fall. So I had a great deal of material under my belt by the time I wrote my first 4 books. And it was how I got that information that is important, how I got that experience in the framework that it took place in. And then that allowed...
Yeah, but look, I know that you, in addition, you have also established, I think you call it the Institute of Hermetic Studies or Science?
Studies, yes. Institute for Hermetic Studies, yes.
So I'm assuming you're also writing there.
Yeah, so what we did is a lot of the work which you see for that then ends up being published in our either monographs or our study guides.
Right.
Or we have monographs, which are smaller books, of course, on select topics. And we have study guides, which are study guides to topics. And then we have, which is based on lectures and courses.
Yeah.
And then we have collections of essays. So, when I do a blog post or I do, 10 or 12 or 15 of these, after a while, we have to, sort through them by topic and subject matter and then compile them for publication.
But these are for members only, right?
Not really. No, we don't.
Oh, okay.
No, membership is kind of a loose concept because we want people to have access to the information. But again, let me be very clear on this. I want you to read it, but the problem, what we have now in esotericism, is there isn't a sense of commitment. Mm-hmm. The whole structure of it is just not healthy because we need people to know what a healthy organization is and course of study to begin with. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
But then we also need them to commit to it. I mean, I said, the Institute, we have a lot of material online at Teachable, but it's really like a college courses.
Yeah.
You have to apply yourself. You have to join the study groups. You have to put the time and the resources and the energy in, and you've got to give yourself 4 to 8 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's like asking 4 to 8 years. What are you, out of your mind? Well, and let me be very clear about this. You look at a traditional practice and, whether Indian or Tibetan, Tantra, Vijrayana, you're going to do this for maybe 40, 42 days, right?
Right.
That's your intro level.
Yeah.
When I did the Tree of Life, starting with first all the spheres, then the paths, then the elements of Malkuth, and then back up again. Okay, so I did the spheres on the way down and then back up with the paths. Mm-hmm. I did it in a month on each one. So it took 3.5 years just to do the tree. Now I did that at least twice that way. And then I did partial version efforts just up to Tifereth with other groups. So when I talk about the tree, it's experiential. Now, I'm not trying to, pat myself on the back. I'm trying to say that I did it within the context of tradition.
Yeah.
To interiorize it. So we have to look at all these practices now. I mean, the same thing with the lucid dreaming and the body of light work.
Mark, I'm familiar with your attitude on this. So I know you're talking the truth. I've seen you express this before, and I'm behind you on that. Yeah. But I'm still impressed about your productivity. As normal,
well, thank you very much.
Yeah, but what we usually do, I mean, it shows you a devoted student, a devoted brother.
Yeah.
But where can people find your stuff?
Very easy. It's the Institute for Hermetic Studies. Just Google it. You can find us on Amazon, just my name, Mark Stavish, or Institute for Hermetic Studies. And we have courses at Teachable. And that's the important part. We have a lot of courses at Teachable. So if you go there, you can find Institute for Hermetic Studies and sign up for our programs and take them at your leisure. At the ease you would like. So you can do the whole program or you can do it a la carte. It's up to you. And we're constantly developing better ways of interacting with students. We're not working on constantly new content, and we're not content generators. We're not trying to do that. What we're trying to do is find mechanisms of interacting with people, students, that takes what we have, which is very good, and getting you to do it more often, to develop a practice where you will benefit, so that, again, as we said, how will this help you while you're alive? And how will it help you when you're dead? And that you'll have the answers to that so that you can find this liberation, this enlightenment, this freedom you're after.
Yeah, it's practical stuff.
Practice. Yeah, this is practice oriented. There's a lot of literature, but we discourage a lot of reading because we want practice. It's about practice.
And only training and practicing individually, that's what will get you anywhere at the end of the day.
Right.
Yeah, many people have heard of you. Well, you got a new name now, but before you were very often associated with alchemy.
Sure.
And you have written about it. But what would you say about your books? First off, if people join or subscribe to your school, will they then have to buy your books, or will they get it through the school? Are your books separate, is what I'm asking.
The programs are standalone. I would encourage them to buy the books, to read them along with it, because some things are PDF and they're not always easy to read on the screen. So I would instead encourage them to read them. particularly some of the audio programs, which are transcribed, so they're easier to read than listen to.
Right.
And you can listen to them at your leisure again and they've been cleaned up. We've added some additional commentary. But with the courses, we've also added additional teaching materials. So they go together. And of course, it's going to be up to the individual to decide how much effort they want to put into something like spagyrics or alchemy, and how they're going to develop an integrated practice. The foundation of all practice ultimately is going to be meditation, developing concentration, self-discipline and regularity in those practices, and then applying it to a particular discipline. Some people really enjoy spagyrics and alchemy, others not so much. Others prefer ritual magic, others not so much. Some want to go into more of a direct energetic approach, dealing with the energies of the body. And something like the body of light really does evolve off that. It really is a direct relationship to the energies of the body.
And a lucid dreaming too, right?
Well, that is correct. The lucid dreaming part is critical because that is how you take over or blend the experiences of the day with the night, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you move from, what is the word I'm looking for? You create greater continuity of consciousness.
Yeah. Okay. So, people can check out your books. All of them are at Amazon, right?
Not at the moment because we're having trouble getting that updated because of the last year. COVID's been pretty tough on a lot of our volunteers. But we do have...
But can they buy it? I don't encourage people to actually use Amazon. Can they buy it directly from your website?
They can't. I prefer they try and order them and encourage them to order them through their local bookstore.
Right. Yeah. I forgot I had the pandemic as a topic too, but we'll deal with that next time.
That would be fine.
Mark, it's been an absolute pleasure. And
anytime.
I expected it to be deep, but I think we went even deeper than my expectations. So well done, brother. Well done.
Well, we did go into the deep end of the pool pretty quick.
We did. We just threw ourselves out there. That's how it goes. Anyway, I hope you followed, and I promise to get Mark back.
Oh, sounds great.
Thank you very much again.
Oh, well, thank you very much, and I appreciate it.
Okay, Mark, you're a jolly good fellow. Now give the dogs its due. I have to give my cat its due. Talk to you later then. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thus far today, and thanks again to Mark for being a jolly good sport coming on and elaborating on this phenomenon. And the last part we discussed, folks, the so-called body of light, I suppose I should explain that a little better, because there is this notion, I would say it's probably one of the biggest secrets in esoterica, often referred to as the arcanorum, that we don't automatically reincarnate as most people think. You could discuss what is reincarnation, what is death. Nothing in this universe goes to waste. Everything is being recirculated. Cosmos is nothing if not ecological and economical. So even down to the atoms of your body will never cease. When your corpse is dissolved, it becomes a part of everything else in existence. So that said, there's still the concept of mortality, because for all intents and purposes, if you lose your memory, you also lose your identity and everything, and your experiences and everything else. And that's, as you remember, I mentioned in the show today, this phenomenon of retaining your memory is really what freedom is all about, and also what control is all about. And so if we automatically lose everything upon the transition phase we call death, then it's actually a form of, it is a mortality, and we are born again from scratch, although karma keeps tabs. So in esoterica, there is this knowledge about how to avoid, to different degrees, losing yourself, and how to retain as much as possible of the love and wisdom you've accumulated through life. And that practice, that discipline, is referred to in different names depending on tradition. and terminology used wherever in the world this secret is communicated. And there's also different approaches to how to do this. But we will have a full discussion on this probably biggest spiritual mystery in esoterica next time I have Mark on, which will be some months from now. So those of you who enjoyed the conversation today, well, you're in for a treat next time. Of course, those of you who prefer our more practical shows, more social or political matters, may regard all this as airy-fairy fantasy or illusions. Be that as it may, we can't cater to everyone. It's impossible that everyone enjoys everything all the time. And that's not even a goal of ours. That's why we're a variety show. So sometimes you'll get subjects you really care for, other times not. But at the end of the day, the most important thing is that you actually enjoy those shows that are up your alley. And speaking of variety, it's not just in contents, but also in outlets now. For example, we talked about being in ODC, which is a manifestation of library. And I really recommend that you check us out there and save that link, because we may be gone from YouTube one day. And that's where you're going to find our stuff then, at least our videos. We still, of course, we're at all podcast platforms. So I suggest that you go to the podcast platform you usually use and subscribe to us there. Even if you are already subscribed at YouTube and prefer using YouTube or Odyssey to listen, please also support us in podcast. I don't care if you actually use that to listen to, just subscribe there, because we need that for the numbers. You guys should know this by now. All shows, the real currency we have apart from actual money is subscribers. And speaking of that, it's horrible in YouTube, because I see shows with half or even 1/3 of subscriptions of what we have, and much higher numbers of new shows. Why? 2 reasons. Number one, most of our subscribers were accumulated before YouTube rigged the system. And back at that time, there wasn't this bell thing. First it came and you had to click that in addition to being subscribed. And now there's like 3 levels. Look, guys, you know we are not spewing shows every day. If we did, it's totally fine not to get notified by all shows. But seeing as we are a long form with sporadic releases, you really have to notify of all. So that's number one, that we, I think I saw the number was just 7% of our subscribers get notifications of our shows. So that means we have like basically around 4,000 subscribers who get notified, and the rest is non-subscribers. And even there we saw our subscription numbers go down, despite that we had a huge show dump. You know, from January to May we released 100 shows? I don't know, super many. And views went up, everything went up because of the huge quantity, right? You would think subscriptions would go up. No. We're down in subscriptions in percentages, and we've lost 10,000 subscribers, which have been purged. By the way, that includes people who are getting unsubscribed without knowing it, and then even being forced to subscribe to a mainstream thing. So even if you think you're a YouTube subscriber, double check that you actually are subscribed with notifications. And another reason we have so few with notifications on is because many stopped using YouTube. They're ghost accounts. Now, if you're one of those who listen to us through podcast or Odyssey, if you want to help us out, it's a tremendous support. If you go back to YouTube, just log into your old account, then subscribe to us there, click on all notifications, and then go back to whatever you use. You don't have to use YouTube to listen to us. It's just to get up those numbers, because they are super important for the algorithm. In fact, all likes, comments, and shares influences it in a positive. When it comes to likes, even dislike. A dislike is better than nothing, because it counts as activity. So, and you guys who share our shows in different forums, online, etc., I occasionally discover stuff like that. Excellent. Keep doing it. You guys who comment on our different podcast channels, perfect. I know we're not interacting with you there, but it's still going a long way to help us. So please subscribe at YouTube and at podcast or Odyssey or whatever else you use. And we're going to expand to more platforms. But even if you subscribe to our website, please also subscribe elsewhere. And that's going to be an advantage for you anyway, because so far that's where we announce new shows to the website. So it's still going to matter. Okay, at that note, I'll leave it at this. And we'll part for now. I remain your host, Al. Until our paths cross again. Be seeing you.
Who is number one?